This is Tamor Hussain standing in for reviewer Mike Epstein. Critics and fans have thrown around the term tactical shooter for years to represent any kind of game that somehow mandates that you think about how you shoot. Disintegration is one of the few that literally blends real-time tactics with first-person shooting. It isn't a unique mix, though the balance of the two styles feels different than other times we've seen it over the years. The strength of its parts and the way you constantly switch between them build up an intense field commander fantasy.
Neutralized.
As Roma Shoal, the grav cycle flying commander of a robot special forces squad, you are the scout, the artillery, the healer, and whatever else your team needs you to be. And yet, while it sounds like you're holding all the cards, you still need the team to do most of the trigger pulling, so your most important role is shot caller. You tell them where to go and who to shoot. If you don't anticipate and react to the enemy's maneuvers, they get overwhelmed and everyone dies. So, as Roma, you are constantly in motion. As the team leader, you have a lot of responsibilities, and you need to switch hats often, pointing out new cover, shooting healing beacons, and calling on each of your 2 to 4 bots on the ground to use their special abilities. Monitoring the skills, which include armor weakening concussion grenades and fields that slow enemies down, is especially important. With a small team often fighting off much larger numbers, timing and syncing these skills to give you the upper hand rapidly becomes incredibly important. Across the board though, you constantly need to be present but also focus your attention everywhere at once. Managing all these tasks and keeping your proverbial finger on the pulse of the battle gets the adrenaline pumping and can get overwhelming at times, but it's ultimately rewarding as you come out of each victory knowing that it was your orders that won the day. That said, sometimes it can be more stressful than it should be. Though your allies largely rely on your orders, they're not mindless drones. They react to enemies and to their surroundings, but not always in the ways they should. Too often I would direct my team to cover, only to see them stand next to it, or wander out of position to chase enemies when I specifically told them to hold in place. Given the number of enemies thrown at you in certain situations, you really need your soldiers to follow your orders precisely, especially when those orders involve keeping themselves alive. The problem feels especially frustrating because of the game's artfully sparse checkpointing, which reflects natural sequences but often leads you to repeat 10 to 15 minutes of gameplay if and when you die at the climax of a scene. By default, the strategic elements of the gameplay take up far more of your time than the shooting, but surprisingly, it is possible to change that. If you bump the difficulty down from their default Maverick settings, you become less reliant on your teammates to do the shooting. You stay alive longer, so you don't need to mind them, and Roma's guns are more powerful. You can't forget about your team, but the dynamic shifts to a more shooter-forward type of gameplay. It feels like a different game, but that's not a bad thing. Despite overtures towards asserting itself as a sci-fi epic, Disintegration's plot feels rushed. It's a shame because there's a lot of instances of good extra narrative storytelling in the game. The concept of integration, where most people have transferred their consciousness into robots, leads to a lot of interesting world-building wrinkles, including lots of small character-building moments. Without a strong plot though, it's ultimately forgettable.
I'm sure you were a good father, Isaac.
I did what I had to protect them, and I do it again.
In addition to the story, Disintegration does allow you to show your mastery of its unique strategy FPS hybrid gameplay in competitive multiplayer. Teams of up to 5 players, each with their own AI-controlled crew, go at it in familiar riffs on multiplayer staples like Team Deathmatch and King of the Hill. Only one mode of the 3, Retrieval, actually requires you to use your bot squad in a novel way. No matter what mode you play, the multiplayer feels a lot more like the shooter version of Disintegration than the strategy version. Your AI bots die with you, so there's a strong incentive to use your squad as a buffer and target other players. Other than Retrieval, where you have to use a bot to carry the core, the dynamic of being a commander largely goes out the window. They aren't unhelpful, but the strategy isn't necessary beyond minding their abilities. Without that, it's a well-crafted but basic FPS multiplayer mode. The full team 5-on-5 scrums with everyone's bots duking it out looks pretty cool, so I'd recommend checking out at least 1 or 2 matches of that just to see it.
I'm not ready. In the lead.
When Disintegration works, it really works. You really get the sense that you're in the thick of it, the heart of battle. Both the excitement and stress that induces are testaments to how thoroughly the gameplay draws you in. There are elements around the periphery of the experience that could have been better tuned though, but they don't detract from what makes it work.